What do you call an empire that Rome feared so deeply they erased it from existence? Carthage ruled the Mediterranean for 700 years, amassed wealth that made Rome look poor, and brought the Roman Republic to its knees. Yet today, most people know almost nothing about them. How did a merchant colony founded by Phoenician refugees become such a terrifying superpower that Rome felt compelled to obliterate every trace of their civilization? In this documentary, we'll resurrect the story Rome tried to bury forever. Long before Rome was even a collection of mud huts on the Tiber, a different civilization dominated the Mediterranean. Who were these master sailors who would give birth to Carthage? And why did their legacy become one Rome desperately tried to erase? The story begins not in North Africa, but on a narrow coastal strip in what we now call Lebanon. Around 1,500 years before the Common Era, a remarkable people known as the Phoenicians transformed this slender territory into the ancient world's premier maritime civilization. Their principal cities, Tyre and Sidon, clung to the eastern Mediterranean coast, hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Geography became destiny. With limited agricultural land, the Phoenicians looked to the waves. They harvested the abundant cedar forests of Lebanon, crafting vessels that could withstand the Mediterranean's unpredictable temperament. By 1200 BCE, Phoenician ships were venturing far beyond the sight of land, navigating by the stars themselves. While other civilizations hugged coastlines in fear, Phoenician captains sailed boldly into the unknown. What made these merchants so successful? Two innovations changed everything. First, they developed a revolutionary writing system, a 22-character alphabet that simplified the cumbersome pictographic scripts of Egypt and Mesopotamia. This alphabet, ancestor to virtually every Western writing system today, gave Phoenician traders an enormous advantage in record-keeping and communication across their expanding network. Second, they monopolized the production of Tyrian purple, the most coveted dye in the ancient world. Extracted from thousands of murex sea snails, this brilliant purple became the color of royalty and power. A single pound of dye required harvesting roughly 250,000 snails. The labor was grueling, the smell overwhelming, but the profits were astronomical. Kings and emperors across the Mediterranean paid fortunes for purple-dyed cloth, filling Phoenician coffers with silver. By 1000 BCE, Phoenician trading posts dotted the Mediterranean coastline like beads on a string. They established colonies in Cyprus, Sicily, Sardinia, and eventually the Iberian Peninsula. These weren't conquest settlements but commercial outposts, strategically placed to facilitate trade in metals, grain, and luxury goods. The Phoenicians preferred profit to empire, commerce to war. As their ships pushed ever westward, Phoenician navigators explored the North African coast. Here, they found protected harbors, access to African trade routes, and land uncontrolled by major powers. Small trading stations sprang up along the shore, temporary camps where ships could resupply and merchants could exchange goods with local Berber tribes. One of these modest stations, established on a peninsula jutting into the Gulf of Tunis, seemed unremarkable at first. Just another waypoint in the vast Phoenician trading network. But this particular settlement possessed something special: the perfect natural harbor, fertile hinterlands, and a strategic position controlling Mediterranean shipping lanes. The Phoenicians called it Carthaginian, the new city. We know it as Carthage, and it would become something far greater than its founders ever imagined. The year was 814 BCE, though our knowledge of this date comes not from dispassionate archaeology but from legend. In the great Phoenician city of Tyre, a crisis was unfolding within the royal palace. King Matin had died, leaving his kingdom to his two children, his son Pygmalion and his daughter Alyssa, who would become known to history as Dido. According to tradition, Alyssa had married her uncle Acerbas, a priest of Melkart who controlled vast wealth from the temple treasury. The young Pygmalion, consumed by greed, murdered Acerbas to seize this fortune. But Alyssa proved more cunning than her brother anticipated. She secretly gathered her husband's gold, assembled a group of loyal nobles, and fled Tyre before Pygmalion could strike again. The fugitive princess sailed westward with her followers, stopping first at Cyprus, where 80 young women joined the expedition, ensuring the colony's future through marriage and children. Then Alyssa's ships continued toward that promising peninsula her people had been using as a trading post for decades. When Alyssa's fleet arrived on the North African coast, she faced a delicate negotiation with the local Berber king, Iarbas. She requested only as much land as could be covered by an ox hide. Iarbas, amused by such a modest request, agreed. But Alyssa had the ox hide cut into the thinnest possible strips and arranged them in a vast circle encompassing the entire Byrsa hill overlooking the harbor. Outwitted but impressed, Iarbas honored the agreement. Whether this tale is literal truth or allegorical myth matters less than what it reveals. The founding of Carthage was not a military conquest, but a masterful negotiation, a pattern that would define Carthaginian expansion for centuries. Unlike Rome, which would later seize land through brutal warfare, Carthage preferred trade agreements, treaties, and strategic marriages with indigenous peoples. The early Carthaginians understood their precarious position. Surrounded by Berber tribes, separated from their Phoenician homeland by vast distances, they needed allies more than subjects. They intermarried with local populations, adopted Berber military techniques, and established commercial partnerships that enriched both sides. The indigenous Libyans and Numidians found these foreign merchants useful, providing access to Mediterranean trade networks in exchange for agricultural products and military support. On the Byrsa hill, the highest point of the peninsula, Carthaginian architects constructed a magnificent citadel. Massive stone walls rose from the bedrock, visible from miles out at sea. Within these fortifications stood temples to Phoenician deities: Baal-Hamon, supreme god of Carthage, and Tanit, goddess of fertility and war. The temple precincts gleamed with offerings of silver and gold, testament to the colony's rapid prosperity. Below the Byrsa, engineers excavated two revolutionary harbors. The rectangular merchant harbor could accommodate over 220 trading vessels simultaneously, with warehouses lining the quays. Adjacent to it, the circular military harbor, protected by a narrow entrance channel, would eventually shelter Carthage's powerful navy. These harbors transformed Carthage from a trading post into the Mediterranean's premier port. By 750 BCE, less than 70 years after its founding, Carthage had eclipsed every other Phoenician colony in the Western Mediterranean. The new city had become the inheritor of Phoenician maritime supremacy, surpassing even mighty Tyre in wealth and influence. But Carthage was just beginning its ascent. The small refugee colony would soon build an empire spanning 3 continents, challenge the greatest powers of the ancient world, and produced generals whose tactical genius would be studied for millennia. The question was no longer whether Carthage would survive, but how far its ambitions would reach. The eastern Mediterranean was collapsing. In 634 BCE, the Assyrian war machine finally battered down the gates of Tyre after a 13-year siege. The great mother city that had founded Carthage nearly 2 centuries earlier now bent the knee to Mesopotamian overlords. Phoenician ships carrying tribute and taxes sailed east rather than west. The maritime network that had sustained colonies across the Mediterranean was severing. For Carthage, this catastrophe presented an unexpected opportunity. With Tyre in chains, who would coordinate the scattered Phoenician settlements in Sicily, Sardinia, and Iberia? Who would protect trade routes from Greek pirates and rival merchants? The answer emerged from North Africa. Carthage, the refugee colony, would become the new Phoenician capital of the West. But this transformation required more than ambition. The Carthaginians needed a governing system capable of managing an expanding commercial empire without collapsing into tyranny. They developed a sophisticated constitution that would later earn praise from Aristotle himself. 2 annually elected magistrates called Sophites served as chief executives, preventing any single ruler from accumulating dangerous power. A senate of several hundred wealthy merchants debated policy and controlled finances. Most remarkably, a popular assembly of citizens could vote on critical decisions when the Sophites and Senate disagreed. This balanced constitution reflected Carthaginian pragmatism. Merchants, not warriors or priests, dominated the government because commerce was Carthage's lifeblood. Unlike the hereditary monarchies strangling most ancient civilizations, Carthage created mechanisms for peaceful transitions of power and accountability to its citizen body. With stable governance established, Carthaginian admirals turned their attention to expansion. The island of Sardinia, rich in silver and grain, became the first major target. Rather than invading with overwhelming force, Carthaginian negotiators offered local chieftains protection, trade privileges, and autonomy in exchange for accepting Carthaginian oversight. Coastal settlements became Carthaginian colonies while interior tribes maintained independence as allies. By 600 BCE, Sardinia's mineral wealth was flowing into Carthage's treasury. Sicily presented a more complex challenge. Greek colonists had already established powerful city-states along the eastern coast. But western Sicily remained available, and Carthaginian settlers founded colonies at Panormus, Solus, and Motia. These weren't military outposts, but thriving ports that welcomed Greek, Etruscan, and native Sicilian traders alike. For now, Carthage and the Greek cities coexisted through mutual economic interest, though this fragile peace would not last forever. The Iberian Peninsula offered the richest prize of all. The legendary silver mines of Tartessos in southern Iberia produced wealth beyond imagination. Carthaginian merchants established trading posts along the coast, founding Gadir, Malacca, and Abdera. Indigenous Iberian tribes provided metals, timber, and mercenary soldiers. In exchange, Carthage offered manufactured goods, wine, and access to Mediterranean markets. These relationships, built on commerce rather than conquest, proved remarkably stable. By 550 BCE, Carthaginian ships dominated trade routes from Iberia to Syria. Their merchant fleet numbered in the thousands, carrying Spanish silver, Sardinian grain, African ivory, and Greek pottery to markets across 3 continents. Carthaginian navigators had even sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic, exploring the African coast southward and perhaps reaching Britain's tin mines northward. The refugee princess Elissa had founded a city. 2 centuries later, her descendants commanded an empire. But controlling the Mediterranean's wealth meant defending it against rivals. Greek city-states eyed Carthaginian trade routes with envy. And in central Italy, a small Latin town called Rome was beginning its own expansion. Carthage's commercial empire was about to face its first serious military test. While most ancient civilizations concentrated power in the hands of kings or emperors, Carthage perfected a system that would have seemed radical even 2,000 years later: rule by committee. The structure began with the Council of Elders, a senate of several hundred members drawn exclusively from Carthage's wealthiest families. These weren't aristocrats by birth, but successful merchants who had proven their commercial acumen. To join, a man needed not just wealth, but a record of profitable ventures, successful negotiations, and sound financial judgment. The council controlled the treasury, approved treaties, and declared war or peace. But their power faced significant checks. 2 Saffites served as chief executives, elected annually by the citizen assembly. Unlike Roman consuls who commanded armies, Carthaginian Saffites focused primarily on civilian administration and judicial matters. They presided over the Council of Elders, proposed legislation, and served as supreme judges in legal disputes. The dual nature of the office prevented any individual from accumulating dangerous authority. If one Saffite attempted to overstep his bounds, the other could block him. Most remarkably, when the Saffites and council deadlocked on critical decisions, the matter went to a popular assembly where ordinary citizens voted. This democratic element distinguished Carthage from nearly every contemporary civilization. While participation required citizenship and property ownership, excluding slaves and the poorest residents, the assembly wielded genuine power, especially in matters of war. The real innovation lay in the Tribunal of 104. These judges, elected for life by the citizen assembly, reviewed the conduct of all magistrates and military commanders after their terms expired. Generals who lost battles faced investigation. Saffites who enriched themselves illegally stood trial. This tribunal ensured accountability in a way that hereditary monarchies could never achieve. The threat of post-term prosecution kept even powerful families in check. This system produced stability that enabled economic flourishing. Mago, a Carthaginian landowner of the late 6th century BCE, composed a 28-volume agricultural treatise that would influence farming practices for centuries. Written in Punic, the work detailed vineyard management, olive cultivation, livestock breeding, and estate organization. Romans would later consider Mago's text so valuable that after destroying Carthage, they preserved his writings, translating them into Latin. His treatise reveals how Carthaginian landowners had transformed North African estates into profitable agricultural enterprises producing wine, olive oil, and grain for Mediterranean markets. As Carthaginian power solidified, diplomatic relationships became crucial. In 509 BCE, Carthaginian negotiators signed a treaty with Rome, a rapidly expanding city-state in central Italy. The agreement divided spheres of influence. Carthage controlled trade in Sardinia, Libya, and the western Mediterranean, while Rome gained recognition of its authority over Latium. Treaties with Etruscan cities established trade relationships and mutual defense pacts against Greek expansion in Italy. These agreements reflected Carthaginian pragmatism. Why fight expensive wars when commerce could achieve the same goals? The merchant princes of Carthage understood that stable trade relationships generated more wealth than military conquest. But Greek city-states in Sicily were growing increasingly aggressive, threatening Carthaginian settlements in the west. Commercial pragmatism had its limits. Sometimes wealth required defending with blood. The Greek colonists of Sicily had grown dangerously ambitious. In 480 BCE, Gelon, the tyrant of Syracuse, commanded the most powerful Greek army the island had ever seen. He eyed Carthage's western Sicilian settlements with barely concealed greed. Hamilcar, a Carthaginian general from the prestigious Maganid family, assembled a massive invasion force to crush Syracuse before it could threaten Carthaginian interests. The army that departed from Carthage numbered perhaps 300 ships carrying thousands of infantry, cavalry, and war chariots. Phoenician allies contributed additional vessels. Iberian and Libyan mercenaries swelled the ranks. The fleet landed near Himera, a Greek city on Sicily's northern coast. But Hamilcar had underestimated his opponent. Gelon marched his forces to Himera with stunning speed, and what followed became one of ancient history's bloodiest defeats. Greek cavalry infiltrated Carthaginian lines disguised as allies, setting fire to the Punic ships beached along the shore. Hamilcar himself died in the battle, either fighting or, according to some accounts, throwing himself into sacrificial flames. The Carthaginian army collapsed. Thousands drowned attempting to reach ships already burning. Others fell to Greek spears as they fled across unfamiliar terrain. The disaster forced Carthage to accept humiliating terms. A massive indemnity drained the treasury. Carthaginian settlements in Sicily survived, but expansion halted completely. For 70 years, Carthage turned inward, focusing on African territories and strengthening trade networks while avoiding Sicilian conflicts. But Syracuse's ambitions eventually created new opportunities. Dionysius the Elder seized power in Syracuse in 405 BCE and immediately threatened other Greek cities. These cities, desperate for help against their aggressive neighbor, appealed to Carthage. The merchant princes saw their chance. In 409 BCE, Carthaginian general Hannibal Mago, grandson of the Hamilcar who died at Himera, landed in Sicily with a fresh army. His campaign was swift and brutal. Selinus fell first, its population enslaved. Then Himera, where Hannibal avenged his grandfather's death with systematic destruction. For decades, Carthage and Syracuse locked in a grinding series of wars. Dionysius proved a formidable opponent, innovating siege weapons and naval tactics. The conflict drained both powers. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Territories were conquered, lost, and reconquered. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. The balance shifted again in 344 BCE when Timoleon arrived from Corinth to aid Syracuse. This brilliant general defeated Carthaginian forces at the Cramissus River, slaughtering thousands in torrential rain that turned the battlefield into a death trap. Carthaginian chariots bogged down in mud. Heavy infantry couldn't maneuver. Greek phalanxes cut them down methodically. Yet, even after Cramissus, Carthage refused to withdraw completely. The peace treaty of 340 BCE established what would become the status quo. Carthage controlled western Sicily, including the crucial cities of Mocha, Panormus, and Lilybaeum. Greeks dominated the east. The Halykis River formed the boundary between these spheres. This arrangement revealed Carthaginian strategic thinking. They had learned that Sicily could not be conquered entirely, but neither could they abandon their settlements. The western portion provided essential harbors, protected trade routes, and agricultural land. It was enough. But this uneasy balance would not last forever. Far to the east, a new power was rising. Rome had transformed from a minor Italian city-state into a regional hegemon, and Roman eyes were turning southward toward Sicily's wealth and strategic position. The next clash would make the Greek wars seem like minor skirmishes. Between 340 and 264 BCE, Carthage reached the absolute peak of its power. The city that had begun as a modest trading post now commanded an empire stretching from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the borders of Egypt, from Sicily's western shores to the sun-scorched interior of North Africa. No Mediterranean power could match its wealth or naval supremacy. The Carthaginian heartland in North Africa had transformed into an agricultural marvel. Phoenician colonists had developed sophisticated irrigation systems that turned coastal plains into gardens of incredible fertility. Treatises on farming techniques, written by Carthaginian agronomists like Mago, would later be so prized that Romans translated them after destroying the city. Vast estates produced wheat, barley, and olives in quantities that fed not just Carthage but supplied grain to cities across the Mediterranean. The interior regions paid tribute in gold, ivory, and exotic animals captured beyond the Atlas Mountains. In Iberia, Carthaginian expansion reached new heights. Mining operations extracted silver from the mountains near modern Cartagena at a scale that astonished ancient writers. Diodorus Siculus claimed the mines yielded 300 pounds of silver daily, an almost unimaginable fortune. These resources funded Carthage's massive navy and paid for the mercenary armies that protected trade routes from Gades on the Atlantic to the Strait of Sicily. The merchants of Carthage lived in opulence that became legendary throughout the ancient world. Their homes, built on Byrsa Hill overlooking the harbors, rose 6 or 7 stories high, constructed with fine stonework and decorated with Egyptian and Greek artwork. They dined on delicacies imported from across the known world, wore purple-dyed silks that proclaimed their wealth, and conducted business deals involving sums that would bankrupt entire Greek city-states. Carthaginian ships pushed the boundaries of the known world. Around 450 BCE, Hanno the Navigator led an expedition down Africa's western coast, passing through the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. His fleet, comprising 60 ships and 30,000 colonists, established settlements along the Moroccan coast. The expedition sailed southward for days, encountering hippopotamuses, crocodiles, and what might have been gorillas, which Hanno's men called wild people covered in hair. Though scholars debate exactly how far south he traveled, some believe he reached modern Gabon or even Cameroon, a journey not repeated by Europeans for nearly 2,000 years. At the city's heart stood the sacred precinct of Tanit and Baal Hamon. Here, Carthaginians performed rituals that shocked and horrified Greek and Roman writers. The Tophet, a sacred burial ground, contained thousands of urns holding cremated remains. Ancient sources claim parents sacrificed their own children during times of crisis, burning them alive in the bronze arms of Baal's statue while drums and flutes drowned out screams. Modern archaeology has discovered extensive evidence of child burials in the Tophet, though scholars fiercely debate whether these represent sacrifice or merely burial of children who died naturally in a society with high infant mortality. The Carthaginian Senate, dominated by merchant families, and the powerful Council of 104, governed with calculated pragmatism. They avoided the democratic turbulence of Greek cities and the militaristic culture of rising Rome. Generals who failed faced crucifixion. Successful ones received lavish rewards but remained subordinate to civilian authority. It seemed a perfect system for maintaining commercial dominance. Yet storm clouds gathered on the horizon. In Italy, Rome had recently defeated Pyrrhus and now controlled the entire peninsula. The Romans, land-hungry and ambitious, looked across the narrow strait toward Sicily. And there, in the city of Messana, a minor incident would soon explode into a conflict that would determine the Mediterranean's future master. While Carthage enriched itself through trade, Rome was building something entirely different, a military machine forged through centuries of relentless warfare. In 509 BCE, the Romans had expelled their Etruscan kings and established a republic governed by 2 annually elected consuls and a senate of aristocratic families. What began as a modest settlement on the Tiber River would, through sheer military innovation and ruthless determination, transform into Italy's dominant power. Rome's expansion was anything but inevitable. The young republic faced enemies on every side. Etruscan cities to the north sought to reclaim their former dominance. Fierce mountain tribes like the Samnites defended their territories with savage determination. Greek colonies dotted the southern coasts, backed by sophisticated naval powers. Yet Rome possessed something unique, a military system that turned every citizen into a potential soldier. Unlike Carthage with its mercenary armies, Rome built its legions from its own people. Every Roman male citizen owed military service. Farmers abandoned their plows each spring to march under Rome's eagles, then returned to harvest their crops in autumn. This created soldiers with genuine stakes in victory. They fought not for pay alone, but for land, glory, and the survival of their families. The Roman legion evolved into a flexible fighting force organized into maniples, small units that could adapt to any terrain, unlike the rigid Greek phalanx. Through 4 brutal wars between 343 and 290 BCE, Rome crushed the Samnite Confederation. Victory came at terrible cost. At the Battle of Cannae Forks in 321 BCE, an entire Roman army surrendered after being trapped in a mountain pass, forced to march under a yoke of spears in ultimate humiliation. Rome's response? Raise new legions and fight harder. This relentless persistence became Rome's defining characteristic. Other cities might seek peace after defeat. Rome simply raised more soldiers. By 272 BCE, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula south of the Po River through a brilliant system of roads, military colonies, and alliances. Some conquered peoples received full Roman citizenship. Others became allies bound by treaty to provide troops. This transformed Rome from a single city into a confederation commanding hundreds of thousands of warriors. Then came Pyrrhus of Epirus. In 280 BCE, this Greek king landed in southern Italy with elephants, professional soldiers, and dreams of carving out a Western empire. At Heraclea, his phalanx shattered the Roman legions. At Asculum, he won again. Yet after counting his casualties, Pyrrhus allegedly remarked, "One more such victory and I am lost." Rome simply replaced its fallen legions and kept fighting. By 275 BCE, Pyrrhus sailed home defeated. Rome now controlled territory stretching to Sicily's doorstep. Carthage had watched Rome's rise with cautious interest. The two powers had signed treaties in 509, 348, and 306 BCE, defining respective spheres of influence. Carthage ruled the seas and western Sicily. Rome dominated Italy. Neither threatened the other's core interests. But now both powers stood at Sicily's edge, and neither was accustomed to backing down. The spark that would ignite 23 years of bloodshed came from an unlikely source. A band of Italian mercenaries who called themselves the Maritines, the Sons of Mars. These thugs had seized the Sicilian city of Messana through treachery, murdering their hosts and establishing themselves as local tyrants. When Syracuse's ambitious young ruler Hiero II besieged them in 264 BCE, the desperate Mamertines made simultaneous pleas for help to both Carthage and Rome. Carthage responded first, installing a garrison in Messana's citadel. The crisis seemed resolved, but the Mamertines, fearing Carthaginian control, secretly appealed to Rome to drive out their new protectors. The Roman Senate faced an agonizing decision. These mercenaries were murderers and oathbreakers who deserved no help. Yet Messana controlled the narrow straits between Italy and Sicily. If Carthage secured it, they would possess a dagger pointed at Rome's newly conquered southern territories. The popular assembly voted for war. Roman forces crossed the straits and, through a combination of threats and negotiation, convinced the Carthaginian commander to abandon Messana. Carthage executed him for cowardice. The insult demanded response. Two great powers were now committed to a conflict neither had initially wanted. What followed revealed a stunning Roman weakness. Carthage possessed the Mediterranean's most powerful navy, with hundreds of quinqueremes crewed by experienced sailors. Rome had virtually no fleet at all. How could a land power challenge a maritime empire? The Romans did something extraordinary. They reverse-engineered Carthaginian naval technology from a single wrecked warship that washed ashore. Within 60 days, Roman shipyards constructed 100 quinqueremes. But building ships proved easier than sailing them. Roman crews were farmers and soldiers, not sailors. They would drown before learning to match Carthaginian seamanship. So Roman engineers invented a solution, the corvus or raven. This boarding bridge, equipped with a heavy spike, crashed down onto enemy decks, locking ships together. Suddenly, naval battles became land battles fought at sea. Roman legionaries stormed across the corvus as if assaulting a city wall, turning Rome's weakness into devastating advantage. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE, Consul Gaius Duilius led Rome's inexperienced fleet against Carthaginian veterans. When the Carthaginians closed for ramming, the corvus bridges crashed down. Roman marines swarmed across. Carthage lost 50 ships. Rome had won its first naval victory in history. 4 years later came Cape Ecnomus, the largest naval battle the ancient world would ever witness. Rome launched an invasion of Africa itself, requiring the transport of 40,000 soldiers across open water. The Carthaginian fleet intercepted them off Sicily's southern coast. Nearly 700 warships, carrying perhaps 300,000 men, converged in formation. The Carthaginians attempted complex flanking maneuvers, trying to break the Roman formation and attack from multiple angles. But Roman discipline held. The corvus bridges deployed again and again. Roman boarding parties overwhelmed Carthaginian crews. By day's end, Rome had captured or destroyed over 90 enemy vessels. The invasion fleet sailed onto Africa. For the first time in centuries, foreign soldiers would march on Carthaginian soil. The unthinkable was happening. Rome, the land power with virtually no naval tradition, was winning a maritime war. But Carthage's true strength lay not in Sicily's waters, but in Africa's burning deserts, where a very different kind of battle awaited. The Roman general Marcus Atilius Regulus stood on African soil with 15,000 men and surveyed what he believed was inevitable victory. The landing had succeeded beyond expectation. Carthaginian coastal defenses crumbled. The initial skirmishes proved laughably one-sided. By late 255 BCE, Regulus had captured the city of Tunis, just 10 miles from Carthage itself. Panic gripped the great city. The Senate sued for peace. But Regulus demanded terms so humiliating that Carthage chose death over surrender. They would abandon Sicily entirely, pay crushing reparations, and become essentially a Roman client state. The Carthaginian Senate rejected the proposal and turned to desperate measures. They hired a Spartan mercenary commander named Xanthippus, who immediately recognized that Carthage was fighting the wrong kind of war. Stop hiding behind city walls, Xanthippus insisted. Use the open plains. Deploy the war elephants. Let the cavalry dominate. In 255 BCE, the reorganized Carthaginian army met Regulus on flat ground perfect for maneuver. The Roman infantry, invincible in Italy's hills and forests, found themselves trampled by elephants and surrounded by swift Numidian horsemen. The battle became a slaughter. Only 2,000 Romans escaped. Regulus himself was captured and would die in Carthaginian captivity. Rome's African invasion had collapsed in a single afternoon. Yet worse disaster followed. The rescue fleet sent to evacuate survivors encountered a massive storm off Sicily's southern coast. More than 250 ships sank. Perhaps 100,000 men drowned. Rome had suffered perhaps the greatest naval disaster in ancient history. Then, 3 years later, another storm destroyed another fleet. Rome lost over 150 ships. The Senate, reeling from these catastrophes, briefly abandoned naval operations entirely. But Carthage couldn't capitalize on their advantage. The war settled into grinding stalemate. The conflict shifted to Sicily, where a brilliant Carthaginian commander transformed the campaign. Hannibal Barca arrived in 247 BCE and waged a guerrilla war of devastating effectiveness. From mountain strongholds, he raided Roman positions, ambushed supply columns, and melted away before major forces could engage. For 6 years, Hamilcar's mobile operations tied down Roman armies across western Sicily. His soldiers worshipped him. Romans learned to fear his name. But wars are won by resources, not just tactics. Rome's Italian Confederation provided inexhaustible manpower. When storm destroyed fleet after fleet, Romans simply built more. Carthage, relying on mercenaries and overseas trade, was slowly bleeding treasury and will. The accumulated losses had become unsustainable. In 242 BCE, Rome launched one final naval offensive. A fleet of 200 quinqueremes, funded by wealthy citizens lending money to the state, sailed to blockade western Sicily. On March 10th, 241 BCE, this fleet encountered the Carthaginian navy near the Aegates Islands. The Roman commander Lutatius Catulus attacked at dawn. The Carthaginian ships, heavily loaded with supplies for Sicily's garrisons, couldn't maneuver effectively. Roman crews had finally learned proper seamanship. They didn't need the corvus anymore. They rammed and boarded with practiced efficiency. 50 Carthaginian ships were sunk. 70 were captured. Carthage had no more fleets to lose. The treasury was empty. Hamilcar Barca, unconquered in Sicily, received orders to negotiate peace. The treaty stripped Carthage of Sicily entirely and imposed a massive indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver. 23 years of war had ended. Rome controlled its first overseas province. But in the aftermath of defeat, Hamilcar Barca would teach his young son Hannibal to hate Rome with religious intensity. That hatred would return to haunt the victors. The 20,000 mercenaries gathered outside Carthage's walls in 241 BCE had every reason to expect payment. They had fought for years in Sicily. They had bled for Carthage. Now, with peace signed and the army disbanded, they wanted their wages. The Carthaginian Senate stalled. The treasury was devastated by the massive Roman indemnity. Perhaps the soldiers would accept less than promised. The government sent Hanno, a general despised by the troops, to negotiate reduced payment. The mercenaries erupted in fury. They had fought your war, and now you haggle over what you owe? The situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. The mercenaries marched on the city of Tunis, the same position Regulus had held a decade earlier. Libyan subjects of Carthage, crushed by taxes to fund the war, joined the rebellion. Soon 70,000 men surrounded Carthage. The empire that had fought Rome for 2 decades faced destruction from within. What followed became known as the Truceless War, a conflict where neither side took prisoners and mercy was a forgotten concept. The mercenaries crucified Carthaginian commanders. Carthage responded by throwing captured rebels to elephants. Rebel leader Spendius mutilated peace negotiators and sent their bodies back to the city. Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca, recalled from Sicily to save his homeland, executed prisoners in full view of enemy lines. Ancient historians struggled to describe the savagery. Polybius wrote that both sides abandoned every custom of civilized warfare. Captured soldiers were tortured to death. Cities that surrendered were massacred anyway. The brutality shocked even the harsh ancient world. For 3 years, Carthage teetered on the edge of annihilation. Hamilcar Barca proved himself as brilliant in Africa as he had been in Sicily. He maneuvered his smaller army with surgical precision, dividing rebel forces and destroying them piecemeal. At the Battle of the Saw, he trapped the main rebel army in a canyon and starved them into cannibalism before the final slaughter. Spendius and his fellow leaders were crucified. By 237 BCE, Hamilcar had crushed the rebellion. Carthage survived, but the cost was staggering. The Libyan heartland lay devastated. The treasury was emptier than ever. And during Carthage's agony, Rome had made a calculated betrayal. Roman merchants had initially sold supplies to the rebels. Then, when Carthage protested, Rome declared war and seized Sardinia and Corsica, islands that had been Carthaginian for centuries. Carthage, still fighting for survival, could do nothing. Rome imposed an additional 1,200 talents on the indemnity. The seizure was naked opportunism, a violation of the peace treaty barely signed. Even Roman historians later admitted the injustice. But Hannibal Barca would never forget. He had saved Carthage from the mercenaries. He would spend the rest of his life preparing revenge against Rome. The next war was already taking shape in his mind. Hannibal Barca gazed at the gleaming Mediterranean from the Spanish coast in 237 BCE. He had brought an army across the Strait of Gibraltar with a singular purpose: to build a new empire that would make Carthage stronger than ever before. More importantly, to create a power base beyond the reach of the merchant oligarchs who had failed his city. The Iberian Peninsula held the key to everything. Beneath its mountains lay silver deposits so rich they dwarfed anything in Carthaginian territory. Control those mines and Carthage could rebuild its shattered treasury. Build an army loyal to him personally, and Rome would one day pay for its betrayal. Southern Spain was a patchwork of tribal kingdoms and Greek coastal colonies. Hamilcar moved through them with methodical efficiency, offering alliance to those who submitted, destruction to those who resisted. The tribes of Turdetania fell first. Their silver mines at Castulo began pouring wealth directly into Hamilcar's war chest. Within 3 years, Spanish silver was financing the reconstruction of Carthaginian power. But this was no simple conquest. Hamilcar was building something unprecedented. A territorial empire in the Roman style, not the traditional Carthaginian network of trading posts. He planted military colonies throughout the conquered lands. He recruited Iberian warriors into his army, training them in Carthaginian tactics. His soldiers swore loyalty to him personally, not to the government in Carthage. The Senate back home watched nervously. Hamilcar sent them a steady stream of silver which kept them satisfied, but his independence was obvious. He ruled Spain like a king, minting his own coins bearing his family name. His young sons accompanied him on campaign. The eldest, Hannibal, just 9 years old, supposedly swore an oath at his father's altar to be Rome's eternal enemy. In 229 BCE, Hamilcar drowned while besieging a tribal fortress. His son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair inherited command of what had become known as the Barcid Empire. Where Hamilcar had relied on military force, Hasdrubal preferred diplomacy, marrying an Iberian princess to cement alliances with local tribes. The Iberian chieftains proclaimed him their leader, a title that made Carthage's Senate profoundly uneasy. Hasdrubal's crowning achievement came in 228 BCE when he founded Carthaginian, New Carthage, on a magnificent harbor on Spain's southeastern coast. The city was a statement of intent, a capital worthy of an empire, with shipyards, arsenals, and a palace that rivaled anything in old Carthage. Silver from the mines flowed through New Carthage's streets. The city became the administrative heart of Barcid Spain. Rome watched the Barcid expansion with growing alarm. Spanish silver was rebuilding Carthaginian military power. This empire straddling the Pyrenees looked uncomfortably close to Italy. In 226 BCE, Roman envoys arrived in New Carthage demanding negotiations. The resulting Ebro Treaty established a boundary. Carthaginian expansion would halt at the Ebro River, well north of their current holdings. Rome's allies in Greece had asked for protection, and Rome used this as leverage. Hasdrubal agreed. The treaty seemed to secure peace, giving each power its sphere of influence. But one city lay south of the Ebro, technically in Carthaginian territory, Saguntum, allied to Rome. The treaty's ambiguous status of this town would soon prove fatal. For now, an uneasy peace held. The Barcids continued strengthening their Spanish domain, building the army that would one day march on Rome itself. In 221 BCE, an assassin's blade struck down Hasdrubal the Fair. The killer was a Celtic slave seeking revenge for a personal grievance, but his action changed the course of history. The Barcid army in Spain needed a new commander. They chose Hamilcar's eldest son, now just 25 years old. Hannibal Barca took command of the most powerful military force in the Western Mediterranean. His rise had been inevitable. Hannibal had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He had campaigned alongside his father since childhood, learning strategy on dusty Spanish battlefields. He spoke Punic, Greek, Latin, and several Iberian dialects fluently. He could ride for days without rest, fight in the front ranks alongside common soldiers, and plan complex military operations with brilliant clarity. The troops loved him. More importantly, they trusted him absolutely. But what drove Hannibal ran deeper than ambition. Ancient sources claim that when he was 9 years old, just before sailing for Spain, his father brought him to an altar dedicated to Baal. There, Hamilcar made the boy place his hand on the sacrificial victim and swear an oath to be Rome's eternal enemy. Whether the story is literally true or not, its essence captures something fundamental about Hannibal. He carried an unshakable conviction that Rome had betrayed Carthage, and that this betrayal demanded vengeance. The Carthaginian Senate confirmed his appointment. They had little choice. The Barcid Empire in Spain was self-sustaining now, financed by Spanish silver. Hannibal commanded perhaps 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 40 war elephants. This army answered to him, not to merchants in Carthage. Within months, Hannibal turned his attention to Saguntum. The prosperous city sat on a rocky hill overlooking the Spanish coast, 8 days' march south of the Ebro River. Technically within Carthaginian territory, yet allied to Rome through a treaty predating the Ebro Agreement. Its very existence was an insult, a Roman foothold in Barcid Spain. Hannibal began gathering intelligence about Saguntum's fortifications, its food supplies, its political factions. He stirred up conflicts between Saguntum and neighboring tribes, giving himself pretexts for intervention. When the city appealed to Rome for protection, the Senate sent envoys warning Carthage not to attack. Hannibal ignored them. In 219 BCE, Hannibal's army surrounded Saguntum. The siege lasted 8 months. The defenders fought with desperate courage, hurling javelins and stones from their walls, making sorties against the besiegers. Hannibal himself was wounded leading an assault. But Carthaginian siege engines slowly battered the fortifications to rubble. When the city finally fell, Hannibal sold the survivors into slavery and distributed the plunder among his troops. Rome was furious. Ambassadors sailed to Carthage demanding Hannibal be surrendered for punishment. The Carthaginian Senate refused. They had not ordered the attack, but they would not abandon their general. War was now inevitable. What happened next shocked the ancient world. Everyone assumed this would be another maritime conflict, fleets clashing in the Mediterranean while armies fought in Sicily or Spain. Hannibal had different plans. He would march his army overland from Spain to Italy itself, through hostile tribes, across the massive barrier of the Alps, into the heart of Roman power. People called the idea madness. The Alps in autumn were impassable for an army. The journey would take months through enemy territory. Hannibal began preparations anyway. Rome had taken everything from his family, from his city. Now he would take everything from Rome. In the spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal's army departed New Carthage. 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants began the long march north. They carried supplies for weeks, knowing that once they entered hostile territory, every meal would need to be taken by force or negotiation. The first challenge was Gaul. The tribes inhabiting southern France viewed any foreign army with suspicion. Some remembered Carthaginian traders and allowed passage in exchange for gold. Others saw opportunity in ambushing a traveling force. Hannibal's cavalry screened the main column constantly, skirmishing with tribal warriors who harassed the march. The elephants proved useful here, their mere presence often convincing hostile chieftains that battle was unwise. By late summer, the army reached the Rhone River. Roman forces had finally mobilized to stop them, but Hannibal moved too quickly. His engineers constructed rafts and floats to ferry the entire army across, elephants included. The panicked animals were coaxed onto massive platforms covered with earth so they would think they still walked on solid ground. Some platforms capsized mid-river, elephants tumbling into the water, but the great beasts proved surprisingly capable swimmers. Then the Alps appeared on the horizon. Those snow-capped peaks, already dusted with early autumn storms, represented an obstacle no Carthaginian army had ever attempted. The Romans certainly never imagined an enemy would try. But Hannibal had gathered intelligence from Gallic guides who knew the passes. The route was possible, they said, though dangerous even in good weather. The ascent began in September. Narrow mountain trails forced the army into long, vulnerable columns. Local tribes, paid off or persuaded, allowed passage through their territories. But as the army climbed higher, the paths grew treacherous. Rain turned to sleet, then snow. Men who had trained under the Spanish sun now struggled through ice and freezing wind. Horses lost their footing on slippery rocks. Supply animals tumbled off cliffs, taking precious food stores with them. The higher elevations brought worse horrors. Alpine tribes who knew every switchback and ravine laid ambushes, rolling boulders down onto the marching columns, attacking stragglers, melting away before Hannibal's troops could retaliate. Entire units were crushed beneath rock slides. The wounded froze to death where they fell. Hannibal ordered the army to keep moving, knowing that stopping meant annihilation. 9 days after beginning the ascent, they reached the summit. The view stretched endlessly, and there, far below through clearing clouds, lay the plains of northern Italy. Hannibal reportedly gathered his exhausted troops and pointed downward toward their destination. But the descent proved even more treacherous than the climb. Fresh snow concealed the path. Soldiers slipped and fell, tumbling hundreds of feet. The elephants, terrified by the steep slopes, refused to move until their handlers coaxed and prodded them forward step by painful step. At one point, a landslide had obliterated the trail entirely. Hannibal's engineers spent days constructing a new path, using fire to crack the rock face, then clearing debris so the army could continue. Food was nearly gone. Soldiers survived by eating pack animals, then leather equipment, then fallen comrades who had frozen to death. 15 days after starting the crossing, the survivors staggered down into the Po Valley. Of 50,000 infantry who had left Spain, perhaps 20,000 remained. The cavalry had fared better, retaining 6,000 mounted troops. Most remarkably, 21 elephants still lived, traumatized but intact. They had accomplished the impossible. An army had crossed the Alps, losing half its strength but emerging as something harder and more dangerous than what had entered those mountains. Every man who survived had proven himself capable of enduring unimaginable hardship. They had followed Hannibal through hell itself. Now they stood in Italy, their general's oath about to be fulfilled. Rome's legions awaited them, confident in their homeland's defenses, unaware that Carthage's greatest weapon was no longer the army's size but its unbreakable will. The Romans had always won their wars through sheer persistence. When they lost battles, they simply raised new legions and kept fighting until their enemies exhausted themselves. This strategy had conquered Italy and defeated the Greeks. Against Hannibal Barca, it would prove catastrophic. Word of the Alpine crossing reached Rome in late 218 BCE. The Senate dispatched Consul Publius Scipio, who had failed to stop Hannibal at the Rhone, to confront this invasion. He brought 40,000 fresh legionaries north to the Trebia River, where Hannibal's depleted force was recovering from their mountain ordeal. The consul saw opportunity. The Carthaginians were outnumbered, exhausted, and far from home. One decisive battle would end this invasion before it truly began. Hannibal saw something else entirely. He studied how Roman armies fought, how their commanders thought. They were disciplined, brave, and predictable. On a December morning, he sent his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp at dawn. Scipio took the bait, ordering his legions to cross the frigid Trebia River without breakfast, rushing to engage what appeared to be a retreating enemy. The Romans emerged from the icy water numb and hungry. They formed their characteristic triple battle line and advanced toward Hannibal's center, which slowly gave ground. Exactly as planned. While the legions focused forward, Hannibal's brother Mago emerged from concealment with 2,000 hidden troops, striking the Roman rear. Simultaneously, Hannibal's superior cavalry routed their Roman counterparts and fell upon the legion's flanks. The Carthaginian center suddenly stopped retreating and pushed forward. The trap closed perfectly. 20,000 Romans died in the snow. Only 10,000 escaped, cutting their way through Hannibal's center in a disciplined fighting retreat. Rome raised new legions. The Senate appointed Consul Gaius Flaminius to stop this threat. He led 40,000 men north in the spring of 217 BCE, pursuing Hannibal through Etruria. The Carthaginian general marched his army past Flaminius's position, deliberately goading the consul to attack by devastating the countryside. The tactic worked perfectly. Flaminius pursued aggressively, eager to force battle. On a foggy June morning, Hannibal's scouts reported the Roman army marching along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene, trapped between the water and steep hills. Hannibal positioned his troops in the hills overnight, hidden by darkness and terrain. As dawn broke, thick fog rolled off the lake. Flaminius's legions marched directly into the killing zone. The ambush was total. Hannibal's troops descended from the hills, hitting the Roman column along its entire length simultaneously. The fog prevented Roman officers from seeing the disaster unfolding. Units fought isolated battles, unable to form proper defensive lines. Some legionaries were driven into the lake and drowned under the weight of their armor. Flaminius himself died fighting in the chaos. 15,000 Romans were killed in 3 hours. Another 15,000 were captured. Carthaginian casualties numbered 1,500. Rome panicked. 2 consular armies annihilated in 2 battles. The Carthaginians were marching toward the city itself. The Senate took extraordinary measures, appointing Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator with unlimited authority. But Fabius understood what others had failed to grasp. Rome could not defeat Hannibal in open battle. Not yet. Instead, he would shadow the Carthaginian army, never engaging directly, cutting supply lines, denying Hannibal the decisive victory he needed. The Romans called him cunctator, the delayer, and many viewed his caution as cowardice. Hannibal faced a new problem. He could win battles indefinitely, but could he win the war? Rome's patience broke. For 2 years, Fabius had avoided battle while Hannibal ravaged the Italian countryside unopposed. The Roman people demanded action. In the summer of 216 BCE, both elected consuls, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, publicly rejected Fabian tactics. Rome would raise the largest army in its history and crush this Carthaginian upstart through overwhelming force. 8 full legions assembled near Cannae in southern Italy, 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Never before had Rome fielded such power. The Senate's message was clear: no more clever tactics, no more strategic delays. Roman strength would simply steamroll the invaders. Hannibal commanded 50,000 men, including his superb but outnumbered cavalry under Maharbal. The Carthaginian general studied the flat plains near Cannae and saw opportunity where others might see disadvantage. He positioned his army with the Aufidus River protecting one flank, guaranteeing the Romans could only attack frontally. Then he made an unusual deployment. His African infantry, his best troops, formed the wings of his line. His weaker Gallic and Spanish infantry formed the center, pushed forward in a convex bulge toward the enemy. On August 2nd, the consuls ordered their legions forward in an especially dense formation, depth prioritized over width. They intended to punch straight through Hannibal's center through sheer mass. 80,000 men began their advance, confident and disciplined. The battle opened with cavalry clashes on both flanks. Hannibal's Numidian horsemen, vastly superior to their Roman counterparts, quickly routed the enemy cavalry and drove them from the field. But the Roman commanders barely noticed. Their infantry was smashing forward exactly as planned. The Gallic and Spanish center buckled under the legion's pressure, bending backward, beginning to break. The Romans pushed deeper into the gap, their formation compressing further as they drove for what appeared to be imminent victory. Their front ranks were now formed in a concave pocket, surrounded on 3 sides by Carthaginian troops. Still they advanced, thousands of soldiers pouring into the bulge. Hannibal gave the signal. His African infantry on both wings wheeled inward 90 degrees, hitting the Roman flanks simultaneously. The pocket became a trap. Meanwhile, his victorious cavalry completed their rout of the Roman horsemen and swung around to attack the legions from behind. The encirclement was complete. 80,000 Romans found themselves compressed into an ever-tightening ring of Carthaginian soldiers. What followed was systematic slaughter. Packed so tightly they could barely raise their weapons, the legionaries died where they stood. The outer ranks fell first to African spears. As they collapsed, the ring contracted, crushing those inside even tighter together. Men suffocated under the weight of dying comrades. Officers screamed orders that could not be executed. Units attempted to break out but found every direction blocked by enemy forces. Consul Paulus died fighting. Varro escaped with 70 horsemen. By sunset, the killing finally stopped. 70,000 Romans lay dead on that field. 10,000 more were captured. Hannibal's forces suffered 8,000 casualties. No battle before or since has produced such one-sided carnage in a single day. Among the dead were 80 senators who had volunteered to fight, 29 military tribunes, and virtually every officer of senatorial rank. Hannibal's men collected gold rings from the fingers of dead Roman knights and nobles, eventually filling 3 bushels with these symbols of rank. He sent them to Carthage as proof of his impossible victory. The ring of golden rings arrived in Carthage to wild celebration. Hannibal's enemies in the Senate fell silent. Rome's greatest army had been annihilated. Their military system, unchanged for generations, had failed completely. Surely Rome would sue for peace now. What other choice remained? But inside the walls of Rome itself, something unexpected was happening. The Senate refused all talk of surrender. Instead, they began raising new legions. News of Cannae reached Rome within days. The city erupted into chaos. Women tore their clothes in the streets, wailing for lost husbands and sons. Temples overflowed with citizens begging the gods for mercy. Panic gripped even the Senate. Surely now Hannibal would march on Rome itself and finish what he had started. But the Carthaginian general made a fateful choice. Rather than assault Rome's walls immediately, he offered the Senate terms. He would release Roman prisoners for ransom, allowing grieving families to reclaim their loved ones. The price was steep but negotiable. Hannibal expected acceptance. What government could refuse to save its own citizens? The Senate's response shocked the ancient world. They voted to refuse the ransom entirely. Rome would not pay a single coin for prisoners who had failed to die fighting. The message to every soldier in every future legion was brutally clear: victory or death. There would be no third option. Yet Rome's troubles had only begun. Southern Italian cities, watching their supposed protector humiliated repeatedly, began switching sides. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, opened its gates to Hannibal in 215 BCE. The defection stung deeply. Capua provided Hannibal with a secure base, supply depots, and thousands of fresh troops. Other cities followed. Tarentum, strategically positioned on the southern coast, also joined the Carthaginian cause. Then came devastating news from Sicily. Syracuse, Rome's oldest ally on the island, declared for Carthage. King Hiero, who had supported Rome faithfully for 50 years, had died. His grandson Hieronymus reversed alliances immediately, calculating that Hannibal represented Sicily's future. The island that sparked the First Punic War might now provide Carthage the resources to win the second. Rome's situation appeared hopeless. Hannibal controlled southern Italy. The empire was fracturing. Reinforcements were preparing to march from Spain and Carthage itself. Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, commanded a powerful army in Iberia. If he could cross the Alps with fresh troops and link up with Hannibal, Rome would face two Carthaginian armies operating in Italy simultaneously. The city would fall. But Rome refused to surrender. The Senate implemented total war measures. Every male citizen capable of holding a weapon was conscripted. Slave volunteers were offered freedom in exchange for military service. New legions formed from men as young as 14 and as old as 60. Resources were rationed. Wealthy families donated gold and silver to fund the war effort. Rome would fight on, whatever the cost. Meanwhile, Roman commanders showed they could learn. Marcus Claudius Marcellus laid siege to Syracuse in 214 BCE. The city's defenses seemed impregnable, strengthened by machines designed by Archimedes himself. Giant cranes lifted Roman ships from the water and dropped them. Catapults hurled massive stones with devastating accuracy. Direct assault proved impossible. Marcellus settled into a grinding siege. 2 years passed. Starvation slowly weakened Syracuse's defenders. In 212 BCE, Roman soldiers finally infiltrated through a poorly guarded gate during a religious festival. What followed was butchery. Marcellus had ordered Archimedes captured alive, recognizing his genius. But in the chaos of the sack, a Roman soldier found the aged mathematician drawing geometric figures in the sand. When Archimedes refused to abandon his work, the soldier killed him where he sat. Syracuse fell. Its wealth was plundered. Its people enslaved. Rome had sent an unmistakable message. Defection would be punished mercilessly. But Hannibal remained undefeated in southern Italy, and his brother was finally ready to march from Spain with reinforcements. The Roman Senate understood one brutal truth. They could not beat Hannibal in open battle, so they would not fight him. Instead, they appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, granting him absolute authority to implement a radical strategy. Fabius refused every opportunity for pitched combat. His legions shadowed Hannibal's army constantly, camping on high ground just beyond reach, cutting off foraging parties, burning crops ahead of the Carthaginian advance. The Romans called him cunctator, the delayer. Soldiers despised the strategy. Warriors trained for glory found themselves reduced to harassment duty. But Fabius understood what others could not see. Each day without battle weakened Hannibal slightly. His army had no supply lines from Carthage. Every arrow spent, every horse lost, every soldier killed could never be replaced. Time was Rome's weapon. Meanwhile, other Roman armies methodically reconquered rebel cities. Capua paid the highest price for its defection. In 211 BCE, Roman legions surrounded the city with a double wall, one facing inward to prevent escape, another facing outward to repel Hannibal's relief attempts. The siege dragged through months of starvation. Desperate, the Capuan Senate begged Hannibal for salvation. His response was audacious. If Rome wanted a siege, he would give them one. Hannibal marched his entire army directly toward the capital itself. He camped within sight of Rome's walls. Citizens watching from the battlements could see Carthaginian cavalry watering their horses in the Tiber. The cry went up through the streets, "Hannibal at the gates." The phrase would echo through history, becoming synonymous with existential threat. But Fabius refused the bait. The legions besieging Capua did not break formation. They did not march to save Rome. They continued starving Capua into submission. Hannibal waited 3 days outside the walls before accepting the truth. Rome would sacrifice anything, risk anything, to maintain its strategy. He withdrew. Capua fell shortly afterward. Roman vengeance was methodical and complete. The Senate was executed to the last man. The city's leading citizens were sold into slavery. Capua's independence was revoked forever. Its territory became Roman property. Its surviving people would live only at Rome's pleasure. Far to the north, events were shifting the war's momentum. Roman armies in Spain, commanded by Publius Scipio's son, also named Publius Scipio, achieved victories Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal could not ignore. The younger Scipio proved a tactical genius, defeating Carthaginian armies in detail while winning over Spanish tribes through diplomacy and fair treatment. By 208 BCE, Hasdrubal faced a choice: remain in Spain and lose it entirely, or abandon the region and march to reinforce Hannibal. He chose Italy. Hasdrubal gathered every available soldier, crossed the Alps using his brother's route, and descended into the Po Valley. Hannibal knew nothing of this. Roman forces kept the brothers separated, intercepting every messenger. In 207 BCE, Hasdrubal sent riders south announcing his position and proposing they unite their armies. Roman cavalry captured the riders. They now knew exactly where Hasdrubal was marching. More importantly, they knew Hannibal did not. The captured letters revealed everything Rome needed. While Hannibal waited for news that would never arrive, Consul Gaius Claudius Nero made a decision that violated every principle of military caution. He selected 7,000 of his finest soldiers from the army shadowing Hannibal and force-marched them north through 6 days and nights, covering 250 miles to join his co-consul facing Hasdrubal. The remaining Roman forces maintained their camps and routines, lighting the same number of fires each night, ensuring Hannibal noticed nothing unusual. At the Metaurus River, the combined Roman armies caught Hasdrubal completely unprepared. The Battle of Metaurus lasted mere hours. Hasdrubal fought with desperate courage, leading cavalry charges personally when he recognized defeat was inevitable. When his horse was finally killed beneath him, he drew his sword and rushed the Roman lines, seeking death rather than capture. He found it. Roman soldiers cut him down, then severed his head. Hannibal first learned his brother had been in Italy when Roman cavalry threw Hasdrubal's head into his camp. The war's momentum shifted irrevocably, but Rome still faced the fundamental problem. Hannibal remained undefeated in Italy, still dangerous, still commanding veteran troops. They needed someone who could match his genius. That someone was serving in Spain. Publius Cornelius Scipio, son of the general who died fighting Hannibal's brothers, took command at just 25 years old. He had survived Cannae, watching thousands die around him, studying Hannibal's tactics from the blood-soaked field. The experience transformed him. While Rome's generals remained cautious, Scipio saw possibilities others missed. His first move demonstrated this vision. New Carthage, Carthage's Spanish capital, stood heavily fortified on a peninsula considered impregnable. Conventional siege would take months. Scipio studied the city's defenses and noticed the lagoon protecting one wall. Local fishermen told him something crucial. At low tide, the water became shallow enough to wade. He attacked with characteristic boldness. Roman forces assaulted the main gates while Scipio personally led 500 men through the tidal lagoon. They scaled supposedly undefended walls, finding them lightly guarded because the Carthaginians assumed water made them inaccessible. Within hours, New Carthage fell. A siege everyone expected to last the entire campaign season ended in a single day. The victory netted Rome the entire Carthaginian treasury in Spain, military supplies, hostages from allied tribes, and command of the peninsula's best harbor. More importantly, it announced Scipio as something unprecedented, a Roman general who thought like Hannibal. At the Battle of Ilipa in 206 BCE, he proved it definitively. Facing a larger Carthaginian force, Scipio deployed his legions in conventional formation for several days, establishing predictable patterns. Then, on the day of actual battle, he reversed his entire arrangement, placing his strongest troops on the wings instead of the center. The Carthaginians, expecting familiar Roman tactics, found themselves outflanked and crushed. Spain was lost to Carthage, but Scipio was already envisioning something far more audacious. For 15 years, Rome had fought defensively, reacting to Hannibal's moves. Scipio proposed inverting the entire strategy. Instead of continuing the grinding war in Italy, he would take the fight directly to Africa. He would threaten Carthage itself, forcing them to recall Hannibal. The Senate, scarred by decades of Hannibal's dominance, found the proposal almost incomprehensible. Scipio would have to convince them he could accomplish what seemed impossible: invading the homeland of Rome's greatest enemy. The Senate granted Scipio permission, but barely. Invasion of Africa represented such a radical departure from Roman military doctrine that many senators openly opposed it. They gave him limited resources. He could take only volunteers and whatever forces he could scrape together from Sicily. It wasn't confidence in his plan. It was hedging their bets, ensuring his potential failure wouldn't destroy the entire republic. Scipio landed in Africa in 204 BCE with 30,000 men. He immediately began what Hannibal had perfected in Italy, turning Carthage's allies against them. The Numidian cavalry, finest light horsemen in the Mediterranean world, had always formed the backbone of Carthaginian military power. Scipio courted their prince, Messana, convincing him to switch allegiances. When Messana brought his cavalry to Rome's side, the strategic balance shifted fundamentally. The Carthaginian response was brutal. They defeated Scipio's local allies, burned Roman camps, inflicted casualties. But the threat remained undeniable. For the first time since Hannibal crossed the Alps, Carthage itself faced invasion. The city's elders faced an impossible choice. They could continue fighting in Africa against a general who seemed to understand warfare as Hannibal did, or they could recall their greatest weapon. In 203 BCE, after 15 years in Italy, Hannibal received the order to come home. He wept. His soldiers wept. They had marched through snow and desert, conquered city after city, survived battles where death seemed certain. They had transformed themselves from an invading army into something legendary. And now Carthage, which had barely supported them, demanded they abandon everything they'd fought for. Hannibal sailed for Africa knowing what awaited. Not triumph, but a final confrontation with the one Roman general who had studied him thoroughly enough to become dangerous. The two commanders met before the Battle of Zama. Picture this moment, history's two greatest military minds, face to face. Hannibal, now 45, weathered by 16 years of continuous warfare. Scipio, just 33, young enough to be his son. They spoke without translators, both fluent in Greek, the language of educated men. Hannibal offered terms. Carthage would abandon Spain, pay reparations, recognize Roman supremacy. Everything except Carthage's independence. Scipio refused. The time for negotiation had passed. On the plains near Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal deployed 80 war elephants across his front line. He placed his newest recruits forward, seasoned Spanish and Libyan veterans in reserve. His cavalry, critically weakened by Massiniss's defection, guarded the flanks. Scipio countered with a formation unprecedented in Roman warfare. His infantry arranged in columns with gaps, allowing elephants to pass through without disrupting the lines. The elephants charged. Some Roman trumpeters blew sharp, unfamiliar notes that panicked the beasts. Others stampeded back through Carthaginian lines. The few that reached Roman formations found themselves channeled harmlessly between the columns. Hannibal's greatest shock weapon accomplished nothing. The cavalry engagement proved decisive. Massiniss's Numidian horsemen, fighting for Rome now, crushed Carthage's mounted forces and pursued them off the battlefield. Then came Scipio's masterstroke, the exact tactic Hannibal had used at Cannae. The Roman cavalry returned, smashing into Hannibal's rear while infantry pressed forward. Hannibal's veterans fought magnificently, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, exhausted from years of war. The formation collapsed. 20,000 Carthaginians died on that field. Hannibal, who had never tasted defeat in battle, finally experienced what his enemies had endured for 16 years. He escaped with a handful of cavalry, riding through the dust of his shattered army back to Carthage. The city that had recalled him too late, supported him too little, and now faced the consequences of both. The war wasn't quite over, but everyone recognized reality. Rome had finally produced a general capable of matching Hannibal Barca. And Carthage, after half a century of conflict, was broken. The peace terms were humiliating beyond measure. Carthage surrendered its entire navy, save 10 ceremonial vessels. The city paid 10,000 talents over 50 years, equivalent to roughly $400 million in modern currency. every overseas possession vanished. Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, all those hard-won territories gone. Most crushing of all, Carthage could wage no war without Rome's explicit permission. The Mediterranean's greatest maritime power had been reduced to a client state, neutered and monitored. Hannibal didn't flee immediately. He served as Safite, Carthage's highest elected magistrate, from 196 to 195 BCE. His reforms were characteristically brilliant and threatening to those who benefited from corruption. He restructured the tax system, eliminating the intermediaries who had been siphoning public funds for generations. He reorganized the treasury, making finances transparent for the first time. Carthage began paying Rome's tribute without additional taxation, proof of how thoroughly certain families had been looting the state. Those families struck back politically. They sent envoys to Rome claiming Hannibal was secretly negotiating with Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, planning another war against the Republic. Whether the accusation held truth or not, Rome dispatched investigators. Hannibal recognized what was coming. In 195 BCE, he fled Carthage in the night, boarding a ship for the eastern Mediterranean. He was 50 years old and would never see his homeland again. He found refuge at the court of Antiochus III, who ruled an empire stretching from Anatolia to the borders of India. When Antiochus declared war on Rome in 192 BCE, Hannibal offered his services. But the Seleucid king barely used him. Cultural prejudices ran deep. Greek commanders didn't trust this Phoenician general, regardless of his record. At the naval Battle of Eurymedon, Hannibal commanded a small fleet and suffered defeat. His tactical genius, honed commanding armies, didn't translate to sea warfare. Rome crushed Antiochus at Magnesia in 190 BCE. The peace treaty included one non-negotiable clause: surrender Hannibal Barca. He fled again, this time to Crete, then Armenia, finally to Bithynia in northern Anatolia. For 12 years he wandered from court to court, always one step ahead of Roman agents. His military genius remained undimmed. He advised King Prusias of Bithynia on fortifications, strategy, minor wars. But Rome never stopped hunting him. In 183 BCE, Roman agents finally cornered him at his residence in Labissa. Hannibal, now 64, had prepared for this moment. He kept poison in a ring he always wore. Accounts vary on his final words, but Livy recorded him saying, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." He swallowed the poison and died within minutes. Rome had defeated him in battle once, but it took them another 19 years to finish the job. They hunted Hannibal Barca until his last breath because they understood something fundamental. As long as he lived, he remained dangerous. And they were right to fear him. Carthage was supposed to die slowly, withering under Roman tribute and military restrictions. Instead, it recovered with disturbing speed. Within 2 decades of Hannibal's defeat, the city's merchants had rebuilt their commercial empire. Phoenician ships again crowded Mediterranean harbors, their holds filled with grain, wine, olive oil, textiles. The agricultural heartland of North Africa, finally at peace, produced harvests that exceeded even the glory days before the war. By 170 BCE, Carthage had paid off Rome's entire indemnity early. 50 years of tribute settled in just 30. This prosperity terrified certain Romans more than Hannibal's army ever had. Marcus Porcius Cato was 79 years old when he joined a senatorial delegation to Carthage in 153 BCE. A hardliner who'd fought in the Second Punic War, Cato expected to find ruins and poverty. Instead, he discovered warehouses overflowing with goods, bustling markets, new construction everywhere. The population had swelled back to several 100,000. Ship traffic rivaled Rome's own port at Ostia. Cato returned to Rome obsessed. He began ending every speech in the Senate the same way, regardless of topic. Discussing road maintenance? Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Debating grain prices? Carthago delenda estimated tax policy? Carthago delenda estimated. His colleagues thought him mad at first, but Cato understood something about rhetoric. Repetition works. He made the Punic threat tangible. During one Senate session, Cato pulled fresh figs from his toga, supposedly picked in Carthage just 3 days prior. "See how close the enemy lives to us," he declared. Whether the figs actually came from Carthage mattered less than the fear they inspired. 3 days sailing. That's how quickly Carthaginian ships could reach Italy. Rome found its excuse through King Messana of Numidia, Carthage's neighbor and Rome's loyal client. Messana systematically seized Carthaginian territory, knowing Carthage couldn't retaliate without Roman permission. When Carthaginian farmers protested, Messana's cavalry drove them off. When Carthaginian officials complained to Rome, the Senate sided with Messana every time. By 150 BCE, Numidia had swallowed more than half of Carthage's remaining African territory. Finally, Carthage couldn't bear more provocation. In 150 BCE, the city raised an army and attacked Numidian forces. The campaign ended disastrously. Messana's cavalry slaughtered Carthaginian troops by the thousands. But the military outcome didn't matter. Carthage had waged war without Roman permission. They had broken the treaty. Rome declared war immediately. Carthaginian envoys rushed to Rome, offering complete surrender. The Senate accepted, but specified terms. Deliver 300 hostages from noble families, then await further instructions. Carthage complied. Then Rome demanded all weapons and armor. Carthage stripped itself bare, handing over 200,000 sets of armor and 2,000 catapults. Everything. Only then did Rome reveal its true demand. Abandon the city entirely. Carthaginians must relocate at least 10 miles inland, never to see the sea again. A maritime civilization ordered to abandon the Mediterranean. A commercial empire told to become farmers. It was cultural annihilation dressed as mercy. The Carthaginian envoys wept as they heard the terms. They knew what Rome had intended from the start. This was never about security or treaty violations. This was about erasing Carthage completely. Cato's obsession had won. War was coming, and this time there would be no treaty, no tribute, no client-state arrangement. This time, Rome wanted total destruction. When Rome's true demands reached Carthage, the city's initial response was paralysis. They had surrendered everything: hostages, weapons, dignity, and still Rome wanted them erased. But despair quickly transformed into rage. The Senate that had just voted for surrender now voted for war. A city that had disarmed itself would have to forge new weapons from whatever remained. The transformation was extraordinary. Carthaginians tore down temples and public buildings for metal. Women cut their hair to make bowstrings for catapults. Every forge in the city burned day and night. Workshops produced 100 shields, 300 swords, 500 spears, and 1,000 catapult bolts daily. The elderly volunteered for labor gangs. Children hauled materials through streets. In mere months, a defenseless city had become an armed camp. Rome sent its armies in 149 BCE, expecting quick capitulation. Instead, they found walls bristling with newly forged weapons and a population ready to fight to extinction. The Roman assault stalled immediately. Carthage's position was nearly impregnable. Surrounded by water on 3 sides, protected by triple walls 40 feet high on the landward approach. The Romans settled into a siege that stretched from months into years. Command eventually fell to Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the Scipio who had defeated Hannibal at Zama. The younger Scipio tightened the blockade, cutting supply lines and starving the city. By 147 BCE, conditions inside Carthage had become desperate. Disease spread through crowded quarters. Food supplies dwindled to nothing. Still, the city refused surrender. In spring of 146 BCE, Scipio launched his final assault. Roman soldiers breached the harbor walls and poured into the city. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre conducted in slow motion, house by house, street by street. Carthaginians fought from rooftops and windows. Families barricaded themselves in their homes. When Roman soldiers set buildings ablaze, defenders chose fire over capture. The fighting lasted 6 days and nights. Romans advanced through streets choked with corpses. They cleared buildings by setting them afire, then laid planks across the rubble to move forward. Cavalry units couldn't navigate the narrow passages, so legionaries fought on foot with sword and pilum, bleeding for every block. Survivors retreated to the temple of Eshmun on Birsa Hill, the city's highest point. 50,000 Carthaginians, mostly women, children, and elderly, crowded into the sacred precinct. The temple's high priest, Hasdrubal, had commanded the city's defense. Now he emerged alone, fell to his knees before Scipio, and begged for mercy. His wife watched from the temple entrance. In front of the Roman commander, she denounced her husband as a coward. Then she took her 2 children by the hand, walked into the burning temple, and disappeared into the flames. Others followed. The temple became a funeral pyre for thousands who chose death over Roman slavery. Scipio watched the city burn and reportedly wept. He quoted Homer, "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish." His tutor asked why he mourned Rome's enemy. Scipio replied that he wept for the fate of all cities, including Rome itself. The destruction continued for weeks. Scipio ordered every building demolished, every foundation torn up. The harbor was filled with rubble. Roman priests cursed the ground, declaring it sacred to the infernal gods, cursed earth where nothing should ever grow again. Legend claims they sowed the ruins with salt, though this detail appears in no contemporary account. Whether literal or metaphorical, the intent was clear: erase Carthage so completely that future generations would forget it existed. 50,000 survivors were sold into slavery. The Carthaginian territory became the Roman province of Africa. Rome had achieved what 3 wars, 60 years, and countless lives had purchased: absolute victory. But Carthage's erasure was never complete. Its legacy survived in Roman anxiety, in cautionary tales, in the very effort required to destroy it. Rome's greatest enemy lived on as a warning about what happens when commercial rivals become too successful, when mercy seems too dangerous, when fear overwhelms reason. Carthage fell. Carthage's destruction taught Rome that total victory requires total annihilation, a lesson that would echo through centuries of imperial conquest. Subscribe to explore more stories Rome tried to erase.